And then, okay. So I would like to start with land acknowledgement. We acknowledge the land we are meeting on is a traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nation, Inuit, and Métis people. We also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit. And now I would like to bring your attention to a few housekeeping items. Please keep your microphone muted so we can avoid the background noise. We will have time for question and answer at the end of the session, but we'll also be able to answer some questions throughout the webinar. You can use the chat room for that, and we will do our best to monitor the chat room. We want to keep the session very interactive, and we invite you to your inputs at certain times during the session. We know that you have a lot of experience to contribute. As you already read from our webinar flyers, this is newly created course supporting youth newcomer communities. That team of consultants worked together to bring and look at some of the highlights and challenges while we explore the new landscape of working with diverse population of newcomer youth while updating the OCASI course. So we will emphasize how fundamental concepts such as youth engagement, trauma-informed approaches, and anti-oppression have become increasingly valuable within our current content. Today's agenda looks like this. We will talk about background of the course and the process, anti-oppression policy and intersectionality, cultural humility, trauma-informed approaches, youth engagement, emerged college during the COVID. Then we will have question and answer session. After this session, I will show participants and provide information how to register to the course if you're willing to register to take the course. And I will show you the platform, how to navigate through the platform. And now I would like to introduce you to our speakers, who also is who are also the team of consultants who created the course content, Philip Ackerman and Juliana Gortes-Luga. Philip Ackerman has long been an adult educator who has been committed to working with newcomer youth in a wide range of community settings. He has been a strong advocate of access to education for newcomer and migrant youth, supporting several academic and community-based interventions around this issue over the past decade. Most recently, since graduating from the Ontario Institute of Studies in Education with an master's degree of education in adult education and community development. Philip has been the program coordinator at the Social Service Worker, Immigrant and Refugee Program at Seneca College in Toronto. In addition, he is currently the Toronto coordinator for Equitas, supporting human rights-based education for marginalized groups of young people across Canada. Juliana Gortes-Luga has 10 years of experience working with migrant and refugee youth. As a migrant herself, she decided to have a career that focused on creating spaces of empowerment for migrant youth. Juliana holds a bachelor degree in political science and a graduate diploma in community economic development. Juliana has been a career counselor, was the former national coordinator for the Canadian Council for Refugee Youth Network. Currently, she's the school and community liaison for the project Recreation in Montreal. which focuses on promoting the mental health and well-being of migrant youth through creative expression in the schools of Montreal. Juliana integrates an intersectional approach to her work and also has a deep understanding about the systemic roots that create exclusion and discrimination. Now I will stop sharing my screen and give the word to Philip and Juliana.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm now trying to figure out how to share my screen, which always gives me a headache. Yeah, good afternoon. My name is Juliana. I am presenting today on the topic. And sure. Can people see it? Present.
We just see your Zoom invitation, not the PowerPoint.
You just see my Zoom invitation?
I think you have to reshare. I think you shared the wrong app.
How about now?
Now we see it. All good.
Okay, thank you so much. I was freaking out for a bit. Yeah, so that's me. Yeah, so I'm actually joining everybody from Joajogi, Montreal. This is where I live right now. Yeah, like I wanted to give a bit of background about the supporting youth in newcomer communities online course, which is kind of what led to this webinar today. The course is being launched this fall. And today we're gonna talk about some of the main topics that we focus on the course, some of the foundational concepts that we cover. But at first, I wanted to talk about the course itself and the development. We were a team of consultants, including myself, Philip, who's also speaking today, and Dana Cortez, who unfortunately couldn't join us. But she is a young migrant who's currently doing a social work diploma in London. So the team that came together, we have both lived experience, academic experience, community. The three of us are in 3 different stages of our careers. And it was really, I was very happy to have this team because we had these different perspectives and we wanted to center the voices of youth, but also make a course that was accessible for people who work with youth in every day. We also had the support of OCASI, especially Tarana, who was helping us throughout the whole process. We had a youth advisory. We had 8 youth that we met at the beginning and at the end of the course, consulting them about the topics and the things that they really wanted practitioners to know when they work with them. We had a practitioner advisory committee who met with us a couple of times. I would say about 4 times, if I'm not mistaken. And we were also checking in with them about the topics, the things that would be useful, making sure that the language was accessible and that the case studies that we were bringing were relevant to their work experience. So we want to thank all these people who are probably here and who are not here. We were very lucky to have a great team. And the way the course was developed, it's we wanted to have a combination of theory and practice. I think that throughout the last years and also with movements like migrant rights movements, Black Lives Matter, there are a lot of concepts, academic concepts that have come up in terms of inclusion and representation, but sometimes those concepts may not be very clear for practitioners. So a lot of our work is informed by movements, by the mobilization of youth, or like our work in mobilizing youth and supporting youth throughout the last 10 years. But we wanted it to be practical as well. We also had include in the course case studies, practical questions, and another big thing for us was that we throughout the course, and maybe after you leave this webinar, you also start thinking of engaging in a self-reflective practice. So thinking about like, okay, like there are these different forms of oppression, but how does that look like in my everyday work, and how can I support youth, and how can I make spaces safer and more inclusive for everybody? And this is something that we have realized that requires a lot of self-reflection and a lot of commitment to making things better and thinking about things like social justice and inclusion as we do our work. So it's something that it's key in the course. And now, so today I'm gonna focus on the foundational concepts and youth engagement. Youth engagement itself, it's a whole module because it's very important and requires a lot of practice. So yeah, that's what we're gonna do today. So anti-oppressive practice and intersectionality. I think probably most of you are familiar with the concept of like understanding that there are different forms of oppression based on identity, such as race, gender, sexuality, religious affirmation, class, and many other forms of identity. Intersectionality is a term that is coined by Dr. Kimberly Crenshaw, and describes the ways in which intersectionality, in which there are different forms of oppression that intersect and impact people in different ways. For us, this is important because there is like the individual is not separated from the system. The individual is always impacted by the system, and every experience is unique. So even people from the same country, same gender, may have completely different experiences. And something that maybe like a takeaway from including these two concepts is to understand that each person is an individual that is impacted by these different forms of oppression at the systemic level. So today we wanted to give a little sample of what the activities look like in the course. So I'm going to ask everybody to, yeah, this is a lot of text, but maybe I'll just summarize. We have two cases. So like we want you to imagine that you are in a after school program and you meet two different youth. So one is Sonia, who came to Canada. She was sponsored by her dad. Her dad had already lived in Canada and had already like community connections, already knew organizations that could help her, and also hired for her a tutor for like to help her with her math assignments. She volunteered, she's doing very well academically, and she's planning to apply to university next year. she's the only thing that she doesn't make her feel very good is that she doesn't have a doctor, and that sometimes she feels like she lacks energy and hasn't been able to have a proper examination. She can go to a walk-in doctor, but cannot get like a full physical assessment. And then we have, on the other hand, we have Rachel, who shares that she's more comfortable with her English. She's also in the last year of high school, but she just learned that she cannot apply for university because she doesn't meet the requirements. But she could do upgrading and then maybe try to apply to a 2-year college program. But university doesn't seem like an option for her. And although Rachel is committed to her assignments, she still struggles with a lot of schoolwork. She's also helping her aunt take care of the kids of her aunt. And she also learned that if she wants to continue studying, she will have to pay international students fees because she doesn't have a permanent residence. And she's confused because her aunt is the one who has all the documents since she came 5 years ago. So I hope you paid attention because now we have some questions for you. So if somebody wants to answer, either open your microphone for a bit or type on the chat, we have these 3 questions. What is the role identity plays in the situation for each person in the story? What are some systemic barriers that each person has to deal with? And how can an after-school program help each person in the story? So you are being tested. Hi. And we're probably not going to spend a lot of time.
Juliana,
Mhm.
can you please explain the first question a little bit more where it says role identity? I mean, like one I know is doing aftercare for the aunt, another is going to an aftercare. Is that what they're asking in this?
Yeah, I mean, in that sense, it's one part of her identity. Like, yeah.
Hi, I just wanted to answer the first question.
Mhm.
So what is the role identity plays in the situation of each person in the story? It's, as you guys were just saying, culture, for example, culture, or like your background, wherever you come from. It could be from any country. They have different expectations for people in different cultures. For instance, the one where they're talking about taking care of the children of the aunt, in certain cultures or religions, it is expected that children are raised like as a community. So you are expected to help in the house, regardless of your age, especially if you're older and the kids are younger, you're expected to babysit, and that follows you wherever you go. So that is something very important to keep in mind.
Mhm. Thank you. I'm not sure who, I see a raise of hands.
Yeah, so Chander.
I can go next. I'm just going to focus on the systemic barriers that each person has to deal with. Sometime when the newcomers come here, they are supposed to go through the guidance, and guidance, if they will not ask any question, the guidance will just give them some courses to take. But eventually when they need to go to college or university, then they will find out what are the requirements for the program they are going to attend after high school. So it comes back to, as a school settlement worker, our role I'm in a high school, Eastwood Collegiate in Kitchener. So my role is, when I will sit with the student, I normally ask them, what is your goal after high school to accomplish, and where would you like to go, university, colleges? So sometime even it happens with the student, they will take college courses like C courses, and then they need, at the end they will say, oh, my goal is to go to university. So it confuses them in a both ways. So there are so many barriers that as a school settlement worker, we can help newcomer students to understand the system. And then also we run a program for the girls in Eastwood School. We call the Girls Club. That program helps to understand the system and how to navigate in this community. So those kind of program definitely helps. We have also YMCA Immigrant Services and YMCA Newcomers programs. So those programs give them the leadership, because anyway, when we are new to the place, there are confidence, like we are lacking the confidence, and we sometimes we need to ask question, but we then think, oh, if I will ask this question, what will happen, how it will happen. So sometimes those kind of things will put newcomer student behind, and at the end they struggle to go to college and universities.
Juliana, I know you're sharing your screen. There's a couple of other hands up, but there's also Mesa, I'm sorry if I mispronounced your name, in the chat, says for the second story, it would be good. It would be great to have an after-school program for high school that supports in the college university application process with things like guidance, financial aid, government grants, etc. The afternoon program can start in earlier grades, 10 or 11th grade, to support on identifying issues and motivate early on. And then do you have time for another person with their hand up?
Hi, I can speak if that's okay.
Okay.
Great. So I'd like to, sorry?
I think this is the last person because we have more things to go, but yeah. Go ahead.
No problem. It's just short. So I can address the third question. How can an after-school program help each person in the story? I know that some after-school programs have ESL teachers present as well. Working with a nonprofit and specifically working with youth, I know that we have a lot of connections with ESL students. They're aware of a lot of nonprofit services that are available to youth. So that's kind of like a way that a student can speak to someone, an ESL student who is present in an after-school program, who can then direct them to a program like ours, where we can support them with schooling, with employment, with even looking for a family doctor. So an ESL teacher being present in an after-school program could help each person in the story.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, to conclude, I think that there were a few things that were not very open in the stories, but one person was very comfortable to apply for university and the other person wasn't, and had to pay international student fees. So what I was trying to get there is the difference between migration statuses and how they impact people. Also, the other person was an English language learner. The other person might have not. So those are like, yeah, like the like the difference between different migration stories, and when people come from different countries, that means different things once they arrive to Canada. So I'm gonna move on to the next slide. Philip.
It's me. Thanks, Juliana. And it's so great, all these great ideas and insights that everyone's providing. There's so much expertise in this room with all of you. So like Juliana was saying before, these concepts are really foundational to the course. And when Juliana and I and Dina were working with the advisory committees and in our work with youth, that self-reflection piece is really important. So even if we have some familiarity with some of these ideas, it's really important to keep evolving these ideas and really embed them into our work. And that takes, like, as Juliana was saying, it takes a lot of reflection on ourselves and addressing our own biases and thinking about how we can apply these concepts in the different contexts that we all work in and so on. So moving on to cultural humility. To begin, it's really important that we start by, as a starting point, that there's a lot of different ways to think about culture. There's no like one size fits all for when we're talking about culture, right? So culture means a lot of different things to a lot of different people, and it's very dynamic in terms of how we process our own ideas around culture and so on. So in recent years, there's been this push away from this idea of cultural competence, and some of us may be familiar with this idea of cultural competence, and a move towards ideas of like cultural consciousness or cultural humility, which also includes some concepts around cultural safety as well, which is too much to go into for the webinar today, but will be touched on in the course in more detail. So the idea of cultural competence is argued by some that it invites us to make assumptions, so which can aggravate or like amplify generalizations and stereotypes and biases and so on. So this idea that, oh, you're from X country, here's what I know about X country, I'm going to treat you accordingly based on this information I have, right? Not based on my own participation in that culture, but based on what I know. I worked with somebody last week, you must be the same, right? It's kind of painting everybody with this same brush. Where cultural humility, as we'll see in a minute, kind of moves away from that and allows, gives a lot more space for self-identification and so on. So with that brief introduction or refresher for some of you, because again, lots of expertise in the room, we're going to look at a scenario, again, just like we did with anti-oppression and intersectionality. And again, we invite you to like share your thoughts and ideas and so on. So Juliana, can we go to the next slide, please?
Yeah.
So Troy, a newcomer youth, is meeting with his youth worker. So in this scenario, you're not the youth worker, it's someone else, and shares that he has recently come out to his family as gay and was sadly kicked out of his house as a result. So he came out to his family's response was quite violent, and he was kicked out of his house. His youth worker that he's meeting with responds and discloses that she also identifies as a lesbian and has suffered her fair share of homophobia, so she knows exactly what Troy is going through. So a couple of questions for you, and again, please raise your hand if you would like to speak into the mic, or feel free to add into the chat. But although the youth worker may have had the best of intentions, how might her responses have impacted Troy? And so I see Shalik. Shalik?
Yes,
Sorry.
hello.
Is that, did I pronounce your name right?
It's pronounced Shalik.
Shalik? Okay, thank
Yeah,
you.
thank you. So I see a little bit of how intersectionality also plays a role here. I think that as a newcomer youth coming to the youth worker with this piece of information, although she's most likely trying to relate to the youth, it may not be necessarily helpful because the experiences are going to be drastically different. And so again, meanwhile, she was trying to be helpful, this may actually take away from his experiences and may make him feel less safe to come to her with this information, again, feeling afraid that she may be, or they may be, their experience may be kind of belittled. So
Yeah.
I see that kind of being an issue here, yeah.
Thank you, Shalik. Sunbal, do you have anything to add?
Hi, yeah, it was pretty much similar to what she said. Just wanted to add on, yeah, so she was trying to display empathy, but again, it took away from their experience because of intersectionality, because, you know, there are so many differences between their, you know, age, gender, everything, and that makes their existence different. And I think what they could have done differently is that they could definitely show empathy by saying that, you know, that if they want to say that they are also lesbian, they can say, so you don't need to blame yourself, like be happy with who you are, and then ask them more about their experience of what exactly they're going through, instead of trying to relate to them as something that they're exactly going through, because they're not. Yeah,
exactly. Thank you so much, everyone. This is amazing, great contribution. So yes, I think everyone said it, that yeah, it definitely has a lot of different impacts, but definitely negates Troy's experiences, right? Kind of erases and says, I'm not giving you the space to tell me how you self-identify. I'm assuming that I already know, right? And so it doesn't even give Troy the space to share his own perceptions of his culture as a gay man and all the intersections that come in with the other ideas of culture that Troy might experience that the youth worker doesn't know about, right? And so it's not necessarily wrong to self-disclose and say like, I just want you to know that I identify as a lesbian, but I know this is not the same as your experience, but there might be some overlaps, right? So there might be some moments for us to, like, I might have a better understanding of what you're going through, and I want you to know that, right? But not making these assumptions and so on. And people in the chat are saying that their experiences are not the same. Yep, and a safe place to stay. Just for time, I think we're going to move on to the next one. I know there's a couple other hands up, and I know people have more to say, but I just want to dive a bit deeper into cultural humility so we have a bit of a better understanding of it. So what's important to remember, and kind of some foundational ideas around this, is that culture is personal and nuanced and dynamic and intersectional. And so again, everybody might have a different way that they take up their culture and they present their culture and they understand their culture and they make their culture make sense to them, right? And culture doesn't always just mean where you're from and what language you speak and so on and so forth, but it could also mean your sexual identity. For some, it's age. For some, it's geographical location. It's a lot of different things could be interpreted as culture, okay? So in certain contexts, experiences of culture and like responses to culture may aggravate, spark or aggravate trauma, right? So it's whether based on persecution back home or based on systemic barriers that Juliana was articulating earlier on. So practicing cultural humility, it allows us to move away from generalization. So our knowledge and our awareness of culture and our experiences with a similar culture can inform our practice in some ways, but we never want to paint everybody with the same brush. We want to move to authentic self-identification, allowing that person to self-identify and giving them the space to do that, right? Making sure that their voice is prioritized and their voice is being heard. In the scenario, we also saw that it aggravated power dynamics, right? Like, oh, I know already. I'm the expert. I get this, right? And so Troy didn't have even space to share. So it can, practicing cultural humility can kind of reduce some of those power dynamics and kind of level the playing field in some ways. So the aim is to open up spaces where youth can express their culture however they feel most comfortable, right? And if you're working with a group of youth, that comes in with when you're building the space. And the course goes into a lot more detail around really co-creating spaces with youth, and really making sure that they have agency throughout the processes, right? And in Juliana and my experience, it's so valuable to do this, and it really has some really profound effects. Okay, next slide, please. So a trauma-informed approach is also something that's probably familiar to everyone. I believe that if all of us really embedded a trauma-informed approach and trauma-informed practice in all of our interactions, not just professionally, but at the store, with the bus driver, all the time, I think we would have a much better world to live in. So I really invite us to reflect and move towards some of these ideas in our practice, personally and professionally. So I was at a conference a few years ago, and it was around trauma, and the speaker began by saying 97% of people in the world have had some experience with trauma, and the other 3% are lying, because trauma exists. Trauma is around us in different ways. So all of us have likely come into contact with trauma. We are 2.5 years into a global pandemic, and so there is definitely some collective trauma that we've experienced as a result of that, right? So trauma is not this idea that's way over there anymore. It is in our lives. It is daily. It is experienced in different ways. There's a lot of different work done on trauma and talking about trauma. There's different types of trauma, like single incident trauma, collective trauma, intergenerational trauma, historical trauma, insidious trauma, like the list goes on. And how trauma manifests in us is also unique and different and personal and so on, right? So there's, again, similar to cultural humility, there's no one size fits all, right? We can't paint everybody with the same trauma brush. So at its base, we can go on to the next slide. We're going to get into another scenario. So at its base, a trauma-informed approach to working with youth understands that likely trauma has manifested in this young person's life somehow, right? And so it moves us away from thinking of what's wrong with you to what happened. And it kind of relates back to what Juliana was talking before about this, the systemic oppression, right? These young people are participating in oppressive systems, colonial systems, racist systems, discriminatory, othering, xenophobic systems as well. And that could that could perpetuate trauma in different ways. So it recognizes that and understands like, it's not the easiest world right now. What's going on? How can I meet you where you're at during these times? So another scenario is, so you're running a group, this time it's you're running a focus group on healthy relationships for 8 newcomer students with diverse social locations. So lots of different identities in the room. One participant, a 23-year-old Black woman who is a permanent resident, decides to open up about an abusive relationship and share how calling the police was the best decision she made. As the facilitator, you decide to validate this experience and talk about how such a phone call can be a very difficult yet necessary decision. No sooner had you responded when another participant, a 24-year-old newcomer Black woman, stands up and leaves the group visibly upset. So the questions for reflection are, how might trauma have been a consideration in this scenario? And what could have been done differently? What could you have done differently to be better equipped to acknowledge and respond to trauma in this scenario? We've stumped them. And again, please feel free to raise your hand or jump into the chat.
And somebody said hard questions. Nice.
We're moving past the easy questions now. You've done the easy things and we're moving into the harder things.
I can try something. I wonder if, first of all, recognizing that as part of different communities, we have different relations with police is important.
Yeah.
And so that for the person who was sharing, that it was good to recognize that for that person, calling the police at that time was helpful, but that we have to also acknowledge that for other people, police is not a solution at that time, because of the different ways in which individuals, but also communities have been affected by police behaviors or have had different relations with police. So just naming it, calling it, might be better. That might not reduce the effect. That might still get the other person upset. And I think that's why it's important to have someone else to debrief during sessions like that.
Yes, exactly. So some other things could be in place as well. Thank you for that, and Helika. Faryal, sorry.
Oh, so I would just say, I answer the second question, what could you have done differently to be better equipped to respond to trauma? So first of all, I don't, as a facilitator, I refrain from jumping into validating someone on that instance. I'm a facilitator over there, and my job is to make sure that everyone is heard, but also understand that there are other situations because people have already shared with me different situations. So considering that the lady left, it could be a situation that could have really caused her family to in despair after taking a decision like that or hearing decision like that. So that is something that as a facilitator, my job should be to make sure that everyone is understand and boundaries are kept over there.
Yeah, great. Thank you so much. I'm going to, I know there's a lot of really great ideas in the chat, so I hope people take some time to read those ideas in the chat. And Sumbal, I'll take one more answer from Sumbal.
I just put it in the chat. It's pretty much what she had said earlier about setting boundaries is a good idea, because my question was, how do you validate one person's experience who is sharing with you with so much trust, but also take into consideration other people's trauma, right? Because you don't want to invalidate someone's experience on the spot like that, because that can be difficult for them. You don't know how hard it was for them to share that, right? Finally. So you don't want to just completely invalidate it. So I guess setting boundaries at the beginning is one option, but mine was more of a question to your question rather than an answer.
No, it's good. And I think you're answering your own question in there, in my opinion. And I think it comes back to the first answer that we got, that acknowledging that it's not going to be the same for everyone, right? So like, oh, that must have been a really hard thing for you to do. That must have been very difficult to do. I know that wasn't an easy decision to do, but we also need to remember that not everyone can call the police, right? Because of immigration status, because of, as was said, their experiences with police and different violence that they might have experienced and so on. So this really worked for you, but we just want to remember that it doesn't work for everyone, right? And so kind of there's a balancing act to do, which is, I know all of these wonderful youth workers that are in this space have had to do this balancing act before. We don't want to invalidate that person's experience, but we also want to acknowledge that systems are at play here, and the intersectionality and cultural humility and all those ideas kind of come up, right? So that's why it's really great to like really start thinking about these and applying them into our spaces. Juliana, we can go to the next slide. I'm going to hang up my phone.
Okay. You're muted.
Okay. My first Zoom call, no. So a trauma-informed approach, and there's so much written around trauma-informed approaches, some really interesting things, but it really begins from this acknowledgement that trauma is vast and varied, and it impacts us in different ways, right? So it affects people's lives, capacities, abilities to cope with life's challenges. And I think in the end, we have some of these resources if you want to look more into trauma-informed practice and trauma-informed approaches. So it's based on principles of respect, dignity, inclusiveness, empowerment, and hope, right? So it is really meeting a young person where they're at and really trying to create a safer, more inclusive space for that person, right? So instead of like we worked with youth, and maybe youth that we work with, there's a person who's not showing up to appointments, they're missing their appointments, they're always late, things like that. And instead of saying, come on, what's wrong with you? You can be on time. Do like, you have a watch, you have a phone, you know how to get here on time, right? But it's not, that's putting it on the person, right? So instead we can think about, is there a reason why it's hard for you to get here on time? Would it be easier if I move the appointment later? Would it be easier to connect virtually? So like maybe just exploring with that person of something that's going on, right? So that's moving in the direction of a trauma-informed approach. So it recognizes the need for physical and emotional safety, as well as choice and control in decisions affecting someone's treatment, right? We can go next. Using a trauma-informed approach doesn't mean someone has to disclose trauma. We don't need to say, oh, you've experienced trauma, now I'm going to use a trauma-informed approach. It's just it's like a common denominator. It's a foundational principle that we just meet everyone where they're at, right? And just work under assumptions that trauma may be impacting how this person is interacting with me. So the readiness of individuals to like talk about trauma and connect previous traumatic experience to the present varies, and it's different for different folks, and we have different levels of how we're practicing and so on. But some folks might not be ready to have those conversations. Some folks might be forthcoming and be very aware of it. So it does vary. And again, it links back to intersectionality, which is a really important foundational concept.
Mm-hmm. And I think to add into a little bit about trauma-informed approach, we added in the course something around our own limits and our own training, because in my case, I'm not a psychologist. I cannot help somebody work through trauma, but I can know how trauma impacts people and how to make it a little bit a space that is better for them to interact with. Yep. So I think when we talk about trauma, like we need to be very careful in not like asking people to disclose if we don't have the tools to support them through that, and hopefully have other resources or counselors available who are able to do that, because we may cause more harm if we don't know how to deal with these situations in a professional way. So it's very important to again go back to this self-reflection, self-awareness, and understand what are our limits and what we can do and what we cannot do in the spaces that we provide.
Thank you, Elena.
Yes, Angelica says, yeah, recognizing our own trauma is key and know when we have to step back on certain topics can push our own trauma. Yeah, definitely. So we have, I think the center or the heart of the same course is youth engagement. So we thought about all these foundational concepts or tools, so like anti-oppression, intersectionality, cultural humility, trauma-informed approaches, so that's I think about it as the basis, the foundation for youth engagement. So youth engagement is something that has been very important to Philip, to Dana, and to myself in the last couple of years. I think that it's a work in progress. I think that in the last, I would say, 10 years, we have seen an interest by organizations. Even the Prime Minister has a youth council. So yeah, like the voices of youth are important. Centering the experiences of youth is very, very important for the present and for the future. But getting to do youth engagement is not very easy. So what we tried in the course was to give some starting points so that organizations, individuals can start having youth engagement in their work. So a question for all of you, and again, we're gonna have to take 2 or 3 people at a time because we don't have a lot of time. So one of the questions I have is, what youth engagement strategies have you implemented in your organization? And what are some barriers you have dealt with when it comes to youth engagement? Philip, okay.
I'll get us started. So I just wanted to mention that I think youth engagement, meaningful youth engagement, needs to be embedded in an organization and in the programming. And so meaning having youth on boards, having youth hired, having youth employed at an organization, right? Like just not tokenistically getting their input, but having them actually be part of the team in some ways, right? And really helping kind of steer the course of an organization is, I think, an important piece.
Yeah, I wanted to add to that as well, like having like advisory committees, as you guys mentioned in the beginning, that you also had some youth advisory for this course. Yeah, at CCVT, Canadian Center for Victims of Torture, I'm also having a youth advisory committee where they help me with needs assessments and other things, and they really do feel more motivated when they are in a leadership role. When we're just calling them constantly to come attend this or come do this, versus we're asking them to come and help, I feel like they're more motivated, because one barrier for us has been getting them motivated to stay engaged with us, to attend events and things like that. So when you put them in leadership roles with more responsibility, it's definitely, I think, more effective.
Thank you. So whoever is next, you can just open your microphone.
I can just speak quickly. So I'm quite new in my role within my current organization, but something that we are hoping to do is, or just in general, a great youth engagement strategy is, of course, having youth themselves, and similar to what people were saying, but have youth themselves teach other youth. And in terms of mentorship, I think that it's great when youth have a youth adult relationship and mentorship like that. But I think when youth are able to get together, share their experiences, share their advice, I really think that's when the most learning happens for youth. So that's something that we're really hoping to empower in the work that we do with youth.
There's one more hand up from Ferial. And
So I would say I've been in this work working with newcomer youth for the last 14-15 years, and I think the best is youth, helping out youth, as my other colleague mentioned, and engaging youth, but also giving them a sense of direction. Remember that they are coming to a new country, and they do not have their social connections over here. Getting them into programs that will lead to be successful. That's where how I engage my youth, explaining to them what are the steps to success in this country, and how can they be in the same positions as the mainstream students, and also that really helps them to get a guided pathway. So volunteering, first of all, participating, volunteering, and then employment, and then the next step. So it's by showing them that that there is a way that you can come and be successful over here, and we do have a lot of success stories. Where in my so many years, I have had only few students who have fallen through the crack, and I could not save them, but which I'm sorry about, but majority of the students that I have come across are now successful in different areas. It might be education or employment or engagement, and not everyone is made for the university or college. There are other areas where we can direct them just to make them feel good, because majority of the students that come in, they want to become doctors and engineers, yes? And that's what they tell us, oh, I want to become a doctor and engineer. So, but there is a pathway to it, which for some would be tedious, because learning a new language and getting there, but helping them one step at a time to reach that goal, creating those kind of programs have really helped. And leadership, and that's the answer, making leaders out of our newcomers is the best way. Thank you.
Thank you for that. And there's a couple things in the chat around having roundtables where youth are centralized as experts, co-designing initiatives with youth, and then some of the barriers are power dynamics, biases, unpaid consultation practices, and so on. So really those kind of tokenistic practices.
Okay.
I'm not sure for time, Juliana, if we want to just move into.
Should I move? Yeah, true.
Because I think we need the.
Present, sorry. There is a video, but I'll probably just post the link. Can people, okay. There you go. So yeah, some key points about youth engagement. Yeah, like what people were saying, yeah, centering youth in services, programming, and advocacy. What that means is that they are the experts in their own lives. So when you're providing a service, it's really meeting them where they're at and listening to their guidance and their experience. Same thing, I like something that somebody brought up, I forgot who exactly, but centering them at programming. So yeah, like somebody was saying, instead of inviting youth, okay, come to an event that we put together and we just need you to show up. But if you ask them, like, what is it that you want to see in the programming? Do you want to facilitate a session? Maybe we can take turns and co-facilitate. Also giving them the guidance and the support throughout as they learn skills, because there are people who are also learning. So it's having a balance between giving them leadership roles, but also giving them the tools so that they can have those leadership roles. I have seen many times that when organizations decide, okay, we're gonna, like, youth are the leaders, okay, come up with a policy. And then, I mean, they're in high school, they don't know, they may not know what a policy is, like, so it's basically, yeah, like when they're learning something, like giving them the training, giving them concrete skills that they can adopt and integrate so that they can play on that, they can do that leadership role. There is, set realistic organizational capacity and youth engagement goals. So we invite organizations to do a self-reflection and see, okay, like, what can we do? What are meaningful ways in which we can support youth engagement? It also comes with accountability. So it's being realistic, being transparent with youth. Other things that I have heard from organizations, it's, you guys are the future, you are the leaders, anything that you want is possible. But the reality is that there is a lot of lack of resources. There isn't a lot of spaces for immigrant and refugee youth to express themselves. So there are a lot of limitations, and we need to acknowledge those and start creating spaces so that youth engagement can actually happen. The other key point is build trust for meaningful youth engagement. So it's not, youth engagement doesn't happen in a day. It doesn't happen with like, okay, tomorrow I'm gonna wake up and I'm going to do a youth advisory and you are gonna do all these things in the organization. It comes with hearing youth out, listening to their needs, and figure out a way to meet their needs and support them as they develop leadership. And yeah, by being accountable and being accountable, being transparent with youth about what we can do together. It's always a cooperation. It's collaboration between youth and adults, where we are like having real conversations with each other and building that trust. So trust is very important. This word tokenism, I'm not sure how much familiar people are with this, but something that has been brought up is that youth engagement doesn't happen just by putting a youth in in a presentation, or just by displaying youth in public events. So meaningful youth engagement, it's constant work, constant collaboration, discussions with youth directly, and not just for big meetings or reports, but like really having deep conversations and projects co-created with youth. The last thing is accountability towards youth. So it's important to ensure that we show them that we care about what they say, and that we deliver. And if we cannot deliver, we're transparent about it. I think that this is a big topic. It's a whole module in the same course, and there are a lot of resources that are helpful. But one organization that has done a lot of great work around youth engagement is Apathy is Boring. So you can check out the resources as well. And we also have cited some other sources, like the From Youth to You guide produced by the FCJ Center a while back, but it's a very good document for people to refer to. I'm gonna post the links later before we leave. And that's it.
So Thank you, Juliana. I know we're a little bit behind time, so we're going to go through, I think, this kind of quickly to give some space for questions. And I know Tarana is going to jump in and just talk a little bit about logistics for registering and navigating the online courses and so on. So just because this project, we updated this and we worked on this in the midst of a global pandemic, and a lot of changing things were happening. So we wanted to make sure we touched on some of the emerging challenges that are still continuing to emerge, and we are not out of this pandemic yet, as we all are aware. And so we are anticipating some more challenges might emerge as we transition again and pivot, and all of those words that have become so commonplace for all of us. So some of the challenges that have been identified through this project and by youth is the increased social isolation. And so a lot of times newcomer youth are already socially isolated for different reasons, but stay-at-home orders and social distancing and all of that has really amplified that to different degrees. Rights have really been a challenge because as new powers have been given to police and security guards and TTC people in Toronto and et cetera, there's a quickly changing landscape of registration and rules, and oftentimes newcomer youth often feel targeted by some of these restrictions and so on. So like at one point having to show a letter to show that I have a job, that I'm going to work. And for a young person without status, that might be a hard thing to do, right? And so rights became really unclear during these times. So much information was coming, so difficulties in distilling and organizing all of the information was coming, and thinking about vaccines and thinking about, is the vaccine right for me, and all of these questions. And if I want to go to school, I have to take the vaccine, but I'm afraid of the vaccine. So like so much information to weed through. The digital divide, if we're familiar with that, all of us have different experiences with technology and levels of technology, and youth are the same. So some folks are very comfortable and some folks are not so comfortable, but we're forced to join through platforms such as this, right? And then other things of like, my family's at home, right? I can't disclose certain things because my sister's walking in the background and I don't want to talk about this experience I had, right? So it's harder to connect with resources and so on. And organizations and et cetera. New procedures and delays, immigration systems and so on, and some folks had to have their refugee hearings online for a minute, and so that was difficult. And now that slowly things are returning to back in person, there's been delays in schooling and socializing and so on, right? Especially for young people who have been isolated for years now. So we're going to, I know we want to make sure there's some time for questions from you. So if folks want to add anything else into the chat, please feel free. Any other challenges you've seen, but we'll also open it up to just general questions. If you have questions about the course, about any of the topics that we've talked about so far, or anything else that's coming up for you and resonating with you and you want to say, ask a question, please feel free now. We have a few minutes for questions, and then Tarana is going to go over the logistics.
Thank you. Any questions?
Yeah, so maybe if people are thinking and processing some of this information, and there's a question. Denise?
Yeah, I was just wondering where I can access, you mentioned some resources available, if I can receive those, or where I can find them.
Tarana, are we able to share the PowerPoint with the participants? Can we send that out? Because I think there's some resources, like some of our references in there would provide some of those resources.
Yes, sure. I can do it as soon as you send me after the webinar. We can share all the information they're asking for.
Yep. Perfect. So yeah, in the end, there'll be some some resources for you.
And also to just to take the course, because we have a ton, like, I don't know, we have a lot of resources that relate to each and every topic. So there is like way more than what we have here. This is just like 1% of the whole course. But a great part of the course has resources, activities, things that you could do with the youth, with organizations. So yeah.
Of course, thank you.
Gender.
Just a quick question, and wondering, like, it's easy to engage girls in the programs in school, but difficult to engage the boys. And any tips on that?
Juliana, do you have any ideas? I think again, we want to really think intersectionally and about how people express and identify genders, and we don't want to be careful of binaries, because some people might identify outside or in between these different ideas of gender and so on. But I think there are different ways to engage different folks, and there's different levels of buy-in into a youth program. But again, I think that foundationally, it's really listening to them. And like, if there's a certain population that's coming to the group all the time and coming after school, but there's others that aren't, and they're kind of just hanging out outside, maybe have a conversation and say, like, what would be valuable to you? What would you like to learn more about? What skills would you like be interested in developing, and so on? Or like, how can we make this space more comfortable and inclusive for you, right? And so thinking through having some of those conversations. Juliana, I don't know if you have anything to add.
Yeah, I think also having staff who can relate to the youth. So staff that reflects the youth's identities, that also shows diversity, that is aware of what's going on in, I don't know, social media, new trends, like people who know, who are a bit closer to their realities. Usually helps regardless of the gender. Like, I think that having staff who are diverse and who reflect the youth themselves, it's very helpful.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And Jillian, we have a question from Jillian. Hi, Jillian.
Oh, I'm muted. How are you? Good to see you, Philip.
Good to see you.
So I just wondered if there was, with the SYNC program, and maybe we can just have a statement or two to describe. But when agencies are talking about the difference between programming versus themed-based or just engagement activities, how are we describing actual programming?
Can you repeat the question?
Yeah, so the difference between, and this, maybe we can open it up to the floor. So the difference between youth programming versus running engagement activities, if that's explored.
Yeah, so I'm happy to open it up to the floor, because I think a lot of people in this space would have some ideas around this. My initial thought is that youth engagement should be throughout, right? And so in terms of just even interacting, intakes and so on should be thought through in a youth engaged, trauma-informed way, right? And so like intakes, recruitment, outreach, all of those things should include elements of youth engagement, and really kind of, like Juliana was saying, like, we're not just building something and saying, oh, come to this, but they should be there from the foundation, right? And hearing from them and so on. So if that's in place, then I think the programming that you're delivering is coming from them, right? And has been identified by them. I'm not sure if folks have anything to add to that.
If it's okay if I add something, I think it also depends on the roles in a department as well. I know that different roles have different responsibilities within their organization. I know in our organization, we have specialists who focus more on the youth engagement activities. And then there's someone, for example, my role, where I focus on employment or mentorship. So I think it depends on the roles in a department as well. And that's something that can always be inquired about. I don't know if that answers your question.
Yes, thank you for sharing.
Yeah, and I think that knowing that organization, like some people focus on employment, some people focus on schools. I think that there should be conversations at the organizational level about what youth engagement looks like and kind of like be on the same page about it so that it's something that it's throughout the organization.
Thanks everyone for these.
It comes with tons of advocacy. Those pieces, it's not easy to say, but difficult to do. But it comes with tons of advocacy and ongoing bringing those kind of concerns and challenges youth are going through. And that helps to understand the systemic barrier, whatever we discussed already. So, and as a youth staff, all of us, we need to do on the regular basis advocacy, and that helps wherever we go, and even in the school or the community or our organization. Thank you.
Yeah, and some of the resources in the course, there's like things like checklists and things like that you can get links to, of like looking at your organization or your department or whatever, and is it youth engaged? And is there something you can change to make it more youth engaged, right? So it gives you some like really tangible, applicable things, right? We don't want to just talk about these ideas. We're really looking, and the course looks at how these ideas can be applied into the uniqueness of our own contexts in our work and so on. Alejandra.
Thank you. I just want to ask if we're going to have a follow-up webinar like this in the middle of the course and at the end. This is a learning curve for my organization, right? And my program, the Newcomer Challenge Youth Services, is quite new. So the learning is so steep, and then we would like to check with somebody who has more experience and the other youth workers around the province. And that's my first part of the question. The second one, we are working very close with the school boards, and we are finding tons of resistance to talk about oppression or unwelcoming environments for newcomers. The placements that we are seeing are actually scaring. Like the youth we're working with are being discriminated against in the interpersonal level as much as in the institutional level. But us as youth workers and being employees in an organization, we also have this limitation of not being completely open and honest and direct with the terms we want to use. One, well, probably doesn't need to be answered today, but that's why I was wondering if you have a following webinar where we can resolve these conflicts. Thank you.
Maybe I can comment on the first questions, if you don't mind me, Philip and Juliana. We are planning to do webinar series, and it will be continuous at least for the following 3 years. And today, as I see, really a lot of topics, very interesting topics is coming up. So it seems there's a really big need to continue this webinar series. We're also going to host a forum, in-person forum, with together in partnership with Seneca College and of course Juliana as well, in sometimes in end of February or early March next year. I would, if you allow me, I will send you the invitation. Organization can have their demonstration table, and we are going to pick a team and invite all organizations who would like to attend. Thank you.
Lovely, thank you.
Yeah, I wanted to thank the Alejandra and the other person who just spoke, because yeah, we're sharing a lot of these concepts and practices as information, but I want to recognize the institutional challenges that that we can face when we're trying to include this kind of lenses, when we're trying to advocate. It's not easy, and I think between Philip and I have a lot of experience in facing all those institutional challenges. So I really sympathize, and I want to say that yeah, it's not easy. So I really admire all of you for taking on this kind of work. But that's why I love to create these spaces for conversation, because I think that by having these conversations, we can support each other and strategize to address these institutional challenges, whether it's in schools, in the organizations that we work at. It's sometimes that's where it first happens, or even our colleagues. So it's really, yeah, like I think that that's something that we didn't talk a lot about. But yeah, like to get to this point, to get to all this concept and these understandings, there has been a lot of struggles, if I can say so. Good luck.
Thank you for that.
And over to you, Tarana.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you very much, Philip and Juliana. It's really been very interesting and interactive. I am so happy to hear that participant has shared so many of their experiences and expertise. I will try to be quick, but I will stop first recording here.